In bringing our speakers together for a panel discussion, I'm really delighted to welcome Matt Whitty. Matt is the Director of NHS Innovation, Research and Life Sciences and holds the position of Chief Executive of the Accelerated Access Collaborative. And I can't think of anybody better to really draw out some of the areas that we need to now focus on and the ways in which we ensure our approach to innovation, our research and our engagement across life sciences in all of its dimensions can be most appropriately orientated to ensuring that we're improving patient and health outcomes. So with that, may I welcome Matt and ask you to just open the discussion perhaps with a little vignette of what it looks like from your position in the NHS.
Thank you very much, and we've already heard from a wonderful array of panellists so far. Firstly, apologies to anybody who is expecting a different and more famous Whitty for this section. I've got a number of reflections really. So, one of the most heartening things that I've heard from the panellists so far is that we've heard from world-class researchers. We've heard from some of the biggest companies in the world. They're investing in the UK and investing specifically in this area. And what I've heard so far is that everybody has a bit of the puzzle so far, but nobody has the complete solution together. And I think the element of partnership and collaboration has shone through every single talk that we've had so far. So it'd be great to pick up on some of that as we go through discussions. From the perspective of the Accelerated Access Collaborative, the other really heartening thing is to see the mirroring of some of the work that we're doing at a national level with some of the work that we've got here locally. We've heard from some wonderful speakers so far talking through that. So from a national level, there are 5 areas that we're looking at. So firstly, we're looking to increase the speed, scale and diversity of research in the NHS. We know that this is important because the more that the research is done in the UK, the more translatable that research is for clinicians who are sat opposite from their patient, and they don't need to understand, does the research that was undertaken in a different country translate to the patient that's sat in front of them? Does the health system translate to the patient that's sat in front of them? And we've worked in a number of areas to help speed that up in partnership with colleagues from the National Institute for Health Research. We were also involved in the large commercial deal for the NHS Galleri trial, which recruited over 140,000 patients in under 11 months. So we think this is the largest trial anywhere in the world for a multi-cancer diagnostic. Secondly, we're really looking to improve our demand signalling and our horizon scanning. So what we mean by that is we're looking to better articulate what are the needs that the NHS sees and how can we systematically search for solutions that many of the panellists are working on to help bring those through to patients more quickly. And one of the areas that we have particularly focused on over the last 2 years or so is around reducing healthcare inequalities. So a really important part of the work that we're doing at NHS England is based around the Core 20+5 framework, which highlights the key clinical areas where we can make the biggest difference to healthcare inequalities. And that's going to be a big focus for our national work that we're doing, and I know that will be replicated locally in many areas as well. Thirdly, we're looking at improving the uptake of NICE-approved medicines and medical technologies. We've got a range of programmes that we're looking to do that, including things like the MedTech funding mandate, which is scaling up medical technologies. And the technologies that we've supported, we've got into around about 4 out of every 5 hospitals so far. Fourthly, we can't do this without supporting the health service itself, staff working close and the staff within that. And it's great to see lots of the support programmes today that are supporting that with King's Health Partners as well. We've also got our own national programmes, such as the Clinical Entrepreneurs Programme. And again, we've got fantastic examples of NHS staff coming up with brilliant ideas, one of which was a drone company called Apian, which a few months ago on the NHS birthday was the world's first delivery of chemotherapy by drone, flying across the Solent from Portsmouth to the Isle of Wight. So really cutting down the delivery time for some of these. And fifthly, we can't do this without innovators. So we're doing a number of large-scale deals. So you may have seen things like Inclisiran and Grail. So these are complex transactions where there are national barriers that we're looking to address. Got a range of smaller support programs, similar to some of the seed funding programs that we heard earlier, including the Small Business for Research initiative. And we're also trying to demystify the landscape through things like our innovation service, which is a place where small and medium-sized enterprises can log on to a single place and have a single front door in order to get tailored advice for the right part of the ecosystem, which can be extremely, extremely complicated. So with that, I'd like to welcome the panel, and we have, you've heard from all of the panel already. I'd like to hand over to Jill to see what questions are coming through. So do put the conversation in the chat and questions on Slido.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks so much. And what brilliant presentations and what brilliant videos to take us past lunch. So quite a lot of questions coming through. First question for Georgina. What are the opportunities for researchers, clinicians and staff to work with SC1, and how do they find out more? That sounds like a dream question, Georgina.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, actually. So when I think about researchers, it's a multitude of opportunities. So within our partnership strategy, for SC1, when we're looking at our 3 key areas in terms of mental health, neuroscience, the second being hematology, oncology, and the third priority area being cardiovascular. We have within King's Health Partners and within KCL in particular, exceptional academic leaders who have been doing life-changing work. So we're currently working with them as we build out our partnership strategy. So that's one way we're working with themselves and their team members and their researchers. The other opportunity for researchers across those 3 areas of focus for us would be around if there's an interest in becoming an entrepreneur or spin out companies. What we will start doing is working more closely with K20, the P4 Accelerator, the Cancer Tech Accelerators, and of course there's also KHP Ventures in terms of supporting those researchers who have an entrepreneurial mindset or vision for themselves. So there will be a portfolio of opportunities how they can engage with us. And I think the third question, Jill, was around how they can learn more. So definitely reach out to me directly. I think my email was on the presentation. We have a current website, but I would say by the end of the year, you can expect to see a more comprehensive overview portfolio of all our various offerings on the website, and a lot more to come in the new year. So stay tuned for more is what I would say. It's early days, but exciting nonetheless.
Thank you, and I'm sure we've got more questions coming through.
There's quite a few coming in, Matt. So there's a question for James, actually. So there's plenty of companies investigating psychedelics and actively selling adaptogens. Is this a positive thing, and how do we set the tone for managing this in a safe and appropriate way? James.
Well, part of the reason why I work in a place like this is because it is the appropriate crucible to test these sorts of therapies. And perhaps the contrast with 50 years ago is we now have a legal structure and a clinical trial structure that allows us to work with compounds like psychedelics and work with them in a way that the wider public and governments can understand. I think around any new innovation you will get a lot of noise. And I would say that there is a lot of noise in the psychedelic space at the moment. And we have to think carefully about what is achievable and what is deliverable, and draw on the experience of healthcare delivery in general to answer that question. So I think the way that we are doing it with Compass and the way the other major players in the psychedelic space are engaging with major institutions around the world to do this in a way that governments and the wider public can engage with is the right way. And whilst there may be other efforts around that, that for me is the space that I would concentrate on.
Thanks, that's really clear. And I think one of the interesting things is that you mentioned sort of the shift that actually it's easier to do that now. We've got the infrastructure to sort of do that and the regulatory framework to do that. And it's similar in a way, I guess, to some of the advanced therapies that you only have to go back 4 or 5 years and you're thinking, how are we going to sort of regulate these new agents coming through? How are we going to have the systems in place to develop them? How are we going to actually deploy them? So there's really good alignment, I think, between some of the way that the system is set up to deal with sort of a range of those challenges. Jill, any more questions coming through?
Yeah, there's a question come through for Lorcan and Daniel about the attractiveness of the AHSC for commercial partnerships and what the development's been since COVID to attract those commercial partnerships. So over to you guys.
Well, should I start with that one? So the bit that I've seen has really changed in attractiveness is the kind of investment appetite in terms of international healthcare. So I don't know if people realise, but KCH partners with a hospital in Dubai. So we have King's College Hospital London, Dubai. And we're also in the process of partnering in the construction of a hospital in Jeddah and also in Abuja in Nigeria. And the appetite for that sort of international healthcare platform is much greater. But when you do that in the context of the King's clinical expertise, the expertise across King's Health Partners, you've got a proposition that actually gives investors the confidence to really invest behind. And if I may, I'll take the question in a slightly different direction, because one of the things that I've found in working with Daniel, but also in some of our commercial partnerships, is that being an investor makes you a better partner, and being a partner makes you a better investor. Yeah, there is a synergy between the two of them, and I think that's probably the best example of that, Daniel, is within KHP Ventures. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way that we think about commercial partnerships, obviously we're investing in quite small companies and startups, and the founders, every decision they take and how they use their time is incredibly important. And so, when we invest, we really try to think about what's our playbook of support we're going to offer. That playbook of support is in fact a commercial partnership between the startup and some of the institutions within KHP. So if it's to run a trial, it's a partnership potentially with the trust or with the university. It could be through KHP's clinical trials office. So the way we think about commercial partnerships is how fluid are how easy are we making it for startups to interact with our cluster. Traditionally, it's been the domain of much larger companies that have the kind of, frankly, they have the resources to wait it out, because it can sometimes take a long time. And so how can we make that a really smooth transition for the company to start working with some of their clinical partners, or indeed with some of the people on their team who have a badge from one of the institutions within KHP. So that's how we think about commercial partnerships, and that could manifest itself in terms of a data access agreement, which again, our cluster has been really progressive in starting to think about how can we have commercial data sharing. But it also might manifest itself in terms of a deployment where the integrated care system and one of the charities and the trusts kind of partner together to trial something new. So yeah, we kind of see those as we would from the founder side, as how can we align commercial research and kind of improvement in patient care into one partnership, which I agree makes it kind of, it's easier when we're an investor and we can help them partner. It makes us better at both. I agree with that completely.
There's quite a lot of work over the last year in terms of right across all of our organizations, getting one data sharing agreement, getting one intellectual property agreement. Like these sound quite dry, but they're actually fundamental in terms of how you reduce the friction of startups interacting with our organizations.
Absolutely.
And just as a follow-up to that, to Lorcan really, how do you keep the managerial attention with all of the different things that are going on at the trust on these partnerships and the value that they bring? What are the benefits that really sort of buy in the other people that you work with on the exec?
Well, if I just take it, so I'm the leader on our exec, but again, I kind of go, I don't see this as a distraction. Fundamentally, I'm a better leader, a better manager through having honed myself in some of these commercial activities. We also, for example, have a team that we send out to KCH Dubai. So our deputy chief nurse, our site medical director for Denmark Hill go out and do visits once every 4 or 5 months. I'm absolutely clear they're better at doing their job at KCH for going out and visiting hospitals in an entirely different environment and assessing about whether or not they're adopting King's values and King's way of doing things. So we have to look for the synergies. It's really easy to kind of point out, well, that person's doing that, they're not doing their NHS job, but it's actually, you need to flip it around and see all of the benefits that we're deriving at all levels of leadership. We've got nurses who are going out on secondment. They'll be fundamentally better nurses, and we'll be more likely to retain them after they've had a secondment overseas for a period of time. Anyway, that's my thought. I'll shut up.
Jill.
Just 2 more questions on the slide, Matt. So question for Francesca in terms of what are the international comparators and learning for advanced therapies, and what can we learn from elsewhere? And then really a question for you, Matt, and Georgina and Daniel, about who's best in show internationally on the commercial partnerships, and who can we learn from as we go forward? But first one to Francesca.
So what we can learn from international? I think the best at the moment are still in the States, Philadelphia, Boston, but we are doing quite well if you see the number. And I think because we have found a way to collaborate. Advanced therapies are a field where you particularly need to bring a multi-expertise team, and you never find that in one institution. And what we created with London and UK Advanced Therapies is a group of scientists and clinicians that really are able to come up together and respond to an opportunity. We had an instance just a few months ago where a PI asked me, I have only 2.5 weeks, but I have an opportunity to prepare a multi-million-pound. Can you bring a network? And we did in 2.5 weeks, 80 PIs from 4 universities across UK, and we submitted it. And so I think in this, maybe we are teaching a little bit. And I think I kind of remember a question that you asked for the next that we could say a bit, but I let you respond a little bit first.
So on the international comparators, I think the key point to note is that every healthcare system in the world is completely different. They all have their own unique aspects that they're really good at, and they have their own challenges, which are different, be that on access side, funding size, scale, risk appetite. They're all completely different regulatory systems. Even kind of the social contract that these entities have with their populations is different all over the world. I'd say areas where we're particularly strong, and this came out of a conversation fairly recently with a Fortune 500 company. I was describing some of the work that we did at the Accelerated Access Collaborative, where we bring together the regulator, so with the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, to talk about what's coming through the pipeline, what can they see, and how can the assessment bodies like NICE start to look more closely at what's coming down the pipeline, and how can NICE work with the NHS England and local NHS organisations more closely to look at, in the way they assess things, how can they start to look even more at how these things are adopted, so we can sort of effectively take time out of that process. When I was having this conversation, I was talking about some of the successes we've had in this. So there's examples where there was a diagnostic test for preeclampsia, so a maternity condition, and we scaled this out to 80% of hospitals in the country. And when I was describing the type of activity we did and this partnership between these different regulators, they said, you do realise that nowhere else in the world does this. Nowhere else in the world is there a regular forum where these entities come together to look at how they can take time out of the system. It doesn't necessarily mean that we've solved all the problems or there's not a huge amount of work to do, but nowhere else in the world is doing that. And I don't think we talk about that enough, and the benefits of that enough. So that's one of the things that we'll be working on over the next few months, to kind of effectively tell that story about how far we have come and actually where we want to go next a bit more in that as well.
Fantastic. And then just a final question, and it's a bit of a hard question. So the UK is going through quite a geopolitical, economic, torrid time. How hopeful are we the year ahead of still being able to attract commercial partnerships? I don't know whether, Matt, you want to take that, or we ask our colleagues on the ground.
I'm happy to have a first go while the panel take a few minutes. So I'm extremely confident we will be able to continue to have commercial partnerships for a range of reasons, really. One is we have world-class academic institutions here, and I think if you look back to COVID, the research that was done in COVID in the UK changed practice all over the world, and the quality and speed of that research I don't think other health systems could replicate. So there were articles from the United States talking about, have we missed the boat, are we behind the UK in terms of the quality of this research. And even just on the first output of that research, so during the recovery trial, which was a platform trial that looked at various different technologies that were potentially useful for COVID, dexamethasone, so repurposing of an old medicine that's been around decades, the mortality benefit that showed saved, they estimated in the first year, saved 40,000 lives per week. That trial was set up in 9 days. If that had taken, 6 months, 10 months, that is 40,000 patients who would otherwise have died because we didn't know the answers to that research. There's not many places in the world that can rapidly set up and run a trial of that quality and that scale to do it. So we will always remain commercially competitive in that regard. We're never going to have the scale of China, and we've got a completely different regulatory system to the United States. But we really do have a high quality niche, and we can get things done. I think the other key thing we've got is, I think we sit a bit in the Goldilocks zone. We're big enough, so we're big enough to matter. So we're bigger than some of the Nordic companies, we're bigger than some of the other areas, but we're not so big that it's completely fragmented like some of those. So we really do sit in that sweet spot. And when you align that to our infrastructure that we've heard from people here and a world-class health system, we've got some really good competitive advantages.
And I can add that, through our ATN networks, where we have members from, we started UK, but during COVID, we expanded, and we are receiving a lot of requests of collaboration. So, from Japan, Korea, Germany, United States. So we're optimistic, and we have good practical signs. People are contacting us to seek collaborative work in UK.
Georgina?
Yeah, I'd like to build on that. I'm definitely very optimistic about SC1 and the opportunities in terms of having significant partnerships with big pharma and big tech, but I think the key is how we approach those partnerships, meaning they can't be done in the way traditional partnerships are done. They have to be all-inclusive. They have to have the vision for health equity, which is where big tech and big pharma is going. We also have to think about it more from an integrated value offering. So getting a lot of researchers within a therapeutic area to work together to integrate the great thing that the NHS has to offer, the data sets, the genomics angle of it. So that for me is really about how you take partnership completely different way with a lens of health equity, but also a more integrated approach to it. And I really wanted to comment on the international perspective question, if I may, that came about in terms of where I see some key learnings. I often reflect on what I consider the two international gold standards. One is Boston. There have been a powerhouse in generating some phenomenal biotechs and commercial partnerships, but I would be remiss as a Canadian not to acknowledge the Toronto Mars Innovation District, which has done a phenomenal job in taking a very integrated approach in terms of linking with a world-class university, University of Toronto, having a lot of accelerators that feed into a flagship global accelerator called the Creative Destruction Lab, and really making sure that it's become the go-to place for startups, for entrepreneurs. So I think we can learn a lot from Boston and Toronto, but at the same time, London is unique, it is very special, and we have to find a way to take the best of those, but really do things more differently and really, quite frankly, elevate our game.
Perhaps if I may, just as a kind of a general point, when times are really difficult, those people with strong propositions prosper. Those with weak propositions fundamentally get into genuine difficulty. So what I would encourage the questioner would be to look at the KHP proposition, to look at the impact report that has been done, and make up your mind for yourself about, do you think that is a really strong proposition in what's going to be a really much more competitive world.
Well, Matt, what brilliant answers to some really tough questions. Thank you, Matt, for chairing. Been absolutely brilliant. But thank you to Francesca, to Lorcan, to Georgina, to James and Daniel, and to everybody on the video for really fantastic presentations.